The world is full of beautiful things. They can be hard to see, but they are there, often in places we least expect. For those without sight, this beauty can be hard to realize. We should all be able to share the gift of sight. And although the challenge will be great, the rewards will be greater.
I love this piece because it reminds us of the beauty that surrounds us, the incredible beauty that surrounds us everywhere. But I imagine that many of us take it for granted. The prospect of losing our ability to appreciate that beauty is impossible to comprehend. But sadly, that is the reality for 20 million people who are blind and living on our doorstep in developing Asia. 20 million people who make up half the world's blind. 20 million people for whom life is tough, sometimes beyond tough, and they can't appreciate the beauty that surrounds them everywhere, the beauty that would almost certainly make their lives more bearable. And a particularly disturbing fact is that over 3/4 of this blindness is preventable or treatable. It's what we call avoidable blindness. It just should not be. Now, cataract is the leading cause of blindness in the world. This is a clouding of the lens inside the eye that slowly develops as we get older, and yet it's a condition that's readily treatable by a safe and low-cost operation in cataract surgery. One would think that cataract blindness is the only cause of blindness in the world, because that's all we hear about. But in fact, there are hundreds of causes of blindness. Many are deadly as well. So half of the world's blindness is due to conditions other than cataract. Glaucoma, complications of diabetes, the blinding conditions of childhood, just to name a few, conditions that have been very, very poorly managed in most developing countries to date. Let's look at childhood blindness. 2/3 of the world's blind children live in Asia. Amounts to about 1 million children living on our doorstep who are blind. It's actually a small proportion of the total 20 million, but if we look at the number of years a person has to live with their blindness, it comes second only to cataract as the leading cause of blindness in the world. So it is an enormous problem. And these children receive little, if any, education. Only a small proportion make it to a school for the blind in their country. Most are hidden away in villages, perhaps a source of shame to their families, and certainly a burden on their communities. And there are very limited employment opportunities as well, usually poorly paying jobs, such as offering massage on the streets of the city. And their inability to provide for themselves, their families, for their communities, means that blind people become trapped in a life of poverty. Blind adults and children also die at an earlier age. So what can be done about this enormous problem? It's a problem that's keeping entire communities shackled in poverty. Well, Sight for All has developed a number of strategies that we're using in our fight against blindness, and these are research, education, and the support of infrastructure. So what I'd like to do tonight is just give you some examples how each of these strategies are having a significant impact on blindness in our partner countries. And I'd like to use childhood blindness to illustrate this. So firstly, research. Childhood blindness studies are really important to determine the causes of blindness in a country. We've now undertaken 5 childhood blindness studies in Asia, and what we're finding consistently through our studies is that half of all children at schools for the blind have blindness that could have been prevented or treated. So half are needlessly blind and should not even be there. So what are the leading causes of blindness? Well, these vary from country to country. But in 3 of the 5 countries in which we did studies, the leading cause of blindness was the same. It was measles. Imagine many of you didn't even know that measles could cause blindness. Well, it sure can. This little boy is blind from measles. It's a disturbing image, I know that. I took that image during our childhood blindness study in Myanmar in 2007. This is a sign of a poor country, a country that 10 years ago was unable to protect its children from this entirely preventable outcome. It costs less than $1 to prevent measles in a child, so less than $1 to prevent this. You can imagine in 3 countries, in every school for the blind that I visited, I was surrounded by children that looked like this little boy, and it certainly was one of the most disturbing experiences of my life. It made me realise that there's so much more to blindness than cataracts. And it's due to essentially a lack of advocacy, a lack of specialists to be able to treat the blinding diseases of childhood, but also a lack of specialists to advocate for children with blinding yet preventable diseases such as measles. So we've done the research, we've found out what the problems are. What next? Well, this is when our second key strategy comes in, education. So we train specialists to be able to deal with the blinding diseases of childhood. In fact, we train specialists right across the board in every area of blindness prevention. But I'd like to illustrate the work that we do through this young man. His name is Tan Tunong. He's an ophthalmologist, an eye surgeon from Myanmar, that came and spent a year with us at the Women's and Children's Hospital in Adelaide, training to be a paediatric ophthalmologist, a children's eye specialist. And he returned home in 2010 as the very first paediatric ophthalmologist in his country, the very first for perhaps 20 million children. So you can imagine how busy he's been. In his first year back, there was a 12 times increase in children's eye surgery at the main teaching centre where he was based. That's a pretty phenomenal impact. But even more importantly, he's started training his own colleagues. 2 years ago, he finished training the second children's eye specialist in the country, using the expertise, using the skills and knowledge that he gained during his time in Australia, and is currently training the third and the fourth. So sustainable education is really the hallmark of the work that we do. Now, there are a number of countries where we can't bring doctors to Australia to train because of the poorer English. We can't register them as doctors here. So we created an innovative reverse fellowship program where we actually mobilise specialists from Australia and New Zealand and take the training to our colleagues. And through this process, we've just recently finished training the first children's eye specialist in Cambodia, and we're currently in the midst of training the first children's eye specialist in Laos. And to do this, we've actually got a team of specialists. In fact, we've got 120 what we call visionaries. So not just eye surgeons like myself, but optometrists, ophthalmic nurses, orthoptists, scientists, etc., etc. And collectively, they donate about 10,000 voluntary hours every year. So it's a staggering input of goodwill and expertise that we don't have to pay for. And it actually reduces our overhead down to around the 10% mark. We've actually got a number of those visionaries here tonight, and hopefully some of you will have a chance to meet them later on. Now, our third key strategy I mentioned is infrastructure. There's no point in training someone in Australia or training someone in their home country and not giving them the equipment, the surgical instruments, the diagnostic equipment to allow them to continue to do the work that they need to do. So that's very much a part of what we do. And here we see Dr. Tan, the doctor that we trained in Australia, and his fellow, Dr. Tin. We actually set up the second children's eye centre in Myanmar a couple of years ago, and we donated over $100,000 worth of equipment for that unit. So it's really important to do that. The equipment and the training must go hand in hand. This is Dr. Tan back in his own paediatric clinic at Yangon Eye Hospital in the capital city, which we set up when he returned back in 2010. He is now seeing and treating 20,000 children every year. So that's quite staggering, isn't it? And we've actually calculated the cost of our investment in Dr. Tan to train and equip him. It's amounting to about $1 for every child he's treated. And the more of his colleagues he trains, and collectively the more children they see, that amount will get less and less. So it's a pretty significant investment in the future of children, in the future of a country, and in the future of a part of the world which I think is very important to Australia's future. Now, I just briefly wanted to touch on some of these other causes of blindness. Cataract is the leading cause of blindness in the world. And I mentioned that it's very well looked after, well treated in all developing countries. But quite often what happens is that in rural areas of developing countries where there may be specialists posted, they don't have the equipment to perform the surgery at the highest level, and often the people stay blind. So a very important part of what we've been doing is supplying equipment to allow the doctors to work at the highest level and to get the best results from their cataract surgery. And in fact, in Myanmar, we delivered equipment to 36 centres around the country and in Laos to 7 centres around the country. And through that project, we now have tens of thousands of people every year benefiting from cataract surgery. It's helping to improve their lives, it's helping to alleviate poverty and reduce mortality in two of the poorest countries in the world. Glaucoma is the leading cause of irreversible blindness in the world. So we've been training and equipping glaucoma specialists throughout Asia, including the first in a number of countries. Diabetes is the fastest growing cause of blindness in many poorer communities in the world. So once again, we've been training retinal specialists and equipping retinal specialists to be able to deal with this disease, which I think we're on the brink of a public health disaster. And in fact, this has been our focus in Australian Aboriginal communities as well as its fastest growing cause of vision loss amongst Aboriginal people. So we've created a number of videos to raise awareness amongst people in this community about the need for regular screening of their eyes. And a lot of these videos you can see on our website. Uncorrected refractive errors is also a significant problem. This is visual disability which can be simply corrected by glasses. And there are about 12 million children without glasses in the world. So again, we've been training and equipping optometrists to be able to deal with these problems in a number of countries. So what about unavoidable blindness? It's that 20% of blindness that at this point in time is not preventable or not treatable. Most of this is due to genetic diseases or hereditary diseases. So as part of our studies, we bring genetic samples back to Australia to analyse. And at this point in time, we've actually discovered a new gene for a blinding condition in children in our study in Cambodia. So it's through these studies that we hope to improve our understanding of unavoidable blindness and ultimately to improve our understanding of blindness in its entirety so that one day we truly will be able to achieve sight for all. I'd just like to finish on this slide. It's a slide that depicts what a blind person might see. So as you can appreciate, being blind doesn't always mean that the lights are out. But their world is one of a blur of shapes and colours. They can't see the faces of their family and their loved ones. The opportunity for a solid education, a well-paying job, a fruitful life are very limited indeed. Now, when that veil of blindness is lifted, life takes on a whole new meaning. Now, I'd just like to show you, Tim mentioned that we're going to look at a video. This is a short film that was created for us by an Adelaide filmmaking couple called Urtext. And it was shot during our childhood blindness study in Laos in 2013. So it really gives us an amazing insight into the world of blind children. And we'll share that with you now. It was actually selected for the New York Film Festival, so please watch closely. It is pretty impressive. I mentioned to you that in 3 countries that we did Schools for the Blind studies, Cambodia, Laos and Myanmar, the leading cause of blindness was measles. So amongst the sea of children who are blind from measles in these 3 countries, we, in every school, found children who are blind, or so residing in a school for the blind, because they'd never been tested for spectacles, because there's simply no one there to provide that basic service. So it's a pretty exciting moment, as you can imagine, to find these children, to fit them with spectacles, to discharge them out of the school for the blind and back into the mainstream schooling system with all its profound advantages for their education, their future, and for their lives. So really Sight for All has been spearheading the attack against childhood blindness in recent years, and so we hope that what you've seen tonight will no longer be something that continues to plague these countries. In fact, we are comprehensively dealing with many of the major blinding conditions that confront these countries. We're impacting on about 500,000 people every year across 8 countries. So we would love for you to spread the word about Sight for All. Get behind us, please. There are a number of ways you can do that. Please like us on Facebook. You'll hear about the work we're doing and events. We hopefully will have more events coming up in Sydney. We have a social investment initiative called Vision 1000. There's some information about it on your tables. What we're trying to do is get 1,000 people donating $1,000 every year on an ongoing annual giving project. And at this point in time, it's actually given us complete financial security and sustainability. You can imagine mobilising 10,000 voluntary hours of specialist expertise takes a little bit of doing, and this is what allows all of this to unfold. And we've actually got a fundraising trek coming up in Bhutan in April next year. So if any of you are keen trekkers, I would highly recommend this. Bhutan, we did a childhood blindness study there some years ago. It is the most extraordinarily beautiful country I've visited. The trek has actually been led by Katie Sarah, who's summited every highest peak on every continent in the world. So we'd love for you to join us. We're almost completely filled, but if there's anyone here who would love to be a part of it, we'd certainly welcome you very much. So I'm going to let you get on and enjoy the night. I think you have entree in front of you now. So thanks for listening to me. I'll be back a little bit later and we'll talk some more. But thank you so much again for being a part of tonight. And